Let me take you to a cold Oklahoma night when the world you know and the world you fear collided without warning. Before we dive deeper into this chilling mystery, drop a comment telling me where you're watching from tonight. This story reaches across every state line in America because every parent knows the fear of losing a child, and every community remembers the one case that never went away. This case belongs to Pine Creek, a small Oklahoma town that lived the same quiet rhythm for generations. Folks trusted their neighbors. Kids ran barefoot in backyards until supper. People waved to strangers passing on the road. It was the kind of place where folks didn't lock their doors. They didn't think they needed to. Life felt steady, almost slow, until the afternoon when a 4-year-old boy named Noah Collins stepped into the yard behind his house and disappeared without a sound. No struggle. No footprints. No broken branches. No sign of where he went. In the fall of 1973, Pine Creek held its routine together like a quilt stitched over time. That changed in less than 2 minutes. Noah was playing with his little tractor in the grass. His mother, Linda, stepped inside to grab a quick phone call. She said she'd be right back. She meant it too. She wasn't gone long. About the time it takes to rinse a plate or fold one shirt. When she returned, the yard was still. Too still. The kind of stillness that makes a mother's heart drop before her mind can explain why. She called his name once. Then twice. Then louder, louder, until her voice cracked. Now, if you know anything about towns like Pine Creek, you know folks don't wait to help. Within minutes, neighbors rushed over. A deputy on routine patrol joined in. Search lines formed as the sun set. Flashlights swept across the fields. Dogs barked into the woods. Men, women, and teenagers walked shoulder to shoulder calling Noah's name through the darkness. Still nothing. 3 days of searching turned into nights that felt endless. Helicopters from Oklahoma City flew overhead, their spotlights sliding over pine trees that never gave up a single clue. Not a scrap of clothing. Not one small shoe print. The kind of disappearance that shocks a community and scars it forever. If you're feeling that chill down your spine right now, hit that subscribe button. We're fighting to reach 1,000 subscribers to bring more of these forgotten stories to light. Like Noah, these stories deserve to be found. And now, here's the part that holds people to this story, 51 years past. Half a century. People grew old. People moved away. Kids who helped search had kids of their own. The Collins family stayed. Some would say out of loyalty. Others would say out of pain. Everything changed on a quiet Sunday morning in 2024. A man walked into the Carter County Sheriff's office. Gray streaks in his hair. Rough hands. A tired posture that told the story of someone who'd traveled far. He stepped up to the counter and said 7 words that froze the room. "My name is Noah Collins. I'm the boy." The dispatcher didn't speak at first. You wouldn't either. Noah had been missing longer than most people in that building had been alive. The man didn't raise his voice. Didn't shake or fidget. He simply waited. That calm carried more weight than if he'd shouted or cried. Calm like someone who had practiced those words for years. When deputies asked him to explain, he told them about the blue curtains in his childhood bedroom. The scratch on the back door from his brother's bike. The way Linda hummed a short tune while folding clothes. No imposter could guess those details. The sheriff ordered a DNA test that same day. For the first time in 51 years, Pine Creek felt something it hadn't felt since the search teams cleared out, hope. Late that night, after the station had quieted down, someone walked up to Noah with the results in hand. The evidence confirmed it. It was Noah. But here's the secret every cold case keeps: the return of truth does not mean the return of peace. Sometimes truth pulls a darker path into view. Something long buried wakes up. Something people tried to forget looks back at them. Before the first press release. Before the news trucks arrived. Before the town had a chance to catch its breath. One question echoed through that sheriff's office: where had Noah been all this time? When Noah began to speak, the temperature in the room changed. The story he carried didn't sound like the fantasy of a confused man. His voice didn't tremble. He didn't search for words. He spoke as if he had held this story in his chest for decades, waiting to release it in one steady breath. He said he hadn't been kidnapped. He said he had been taken for his own safety. That claim stunned everyone. If a child wasn't kidnapped, then what pulled him away? Who decided he needed protection? And from what? The answer would flip Pine Creek's past upside down. Because Noah didn't start his life in that cabin by choice. He woke up there, wrapped in an old blanket, alone except for a quiet man stirring soup over a fire. A man named Caleb Boone who claimed he saved him from danger no one else wanted to believe existed. And that is where this story truly begins. Before we move deeper into what Noah revealed, we have to return to the beginning. A case like this only makes sense when you see what Pine Creek looked like in 1973. A time when fear didn't touch the town the way it does today. A time when trouble was always thought to belong somewhere else. Sunrise in Pine Creek used to bring the same sounds every morning. Roosters crowing in the distance. A train horn far off near the state line. Coffee brewing in kitchens where folks read the paper before work. Life moved at a steady pace. Families raised their children with trust in their neighbors and in the land around them. This story will challenge everything you think you know about small-town safety. If you haven't hit that like button yet, now's the time. Each like pushes this investigation further, making sure Noah's truth reaches those who need to hear it. The Collins house sat on the southern edge of town. A simple one-story home with a yard big enough for kids to run and chase each other. A clothesline stretched from one post to another, and most days you'd see Linda hanging shirts and towels while humming the same tune she learned as a child. She didn't sing it loudly. She let it float in the air like a comfort she didn't think twice about. Noah was the youngest. A quiet little boy with big eyes and a habit of carrying his toy tractor everywhere he went. He didn't wander far. He didn't push limits. He stayed close, the way 4-year-olds do when their world is small and safe. Mark, his older brother, lived with a confidence only kids have. He was the one climbing trees, racing bicycles, and getting dirt on clothes faster than Linda could wash them. He wasn't perfect, but he loved his brother. They were different, but close. David, their father, worked long hours. He wasn't a man who talked much, but he had a steady presence. He fixed things that broke around town. He helped neighbors without expecting anything in return. He believed Pine Creek was the kind of town where you didn't need to look over your shoulder. In the days leading up to Noah's disappearance, nothing stood out as strange to the Collins family. No warnings. No threats. No odd visitors knocking at their door. At least none they recognized as dangerous. People saw a few unfamiliar faces passing through the feed store. A truck that didn't match any local plates. A man who stayed a little longer than needed before asking directions to a nearby road. But in towns like Pine Creek, strangers weren't treated with suspicion. They were treated with courtesy. That routine thinking was the first quiet crack in the town's sense of safety. On that warm afternoon in October, the air felt calm. Kids rode bikes past the old post office. Linda stood at the clothesline clipping towels. David worked on a piece of equipment behind the shed. Mark tossed a ball in the air, hoping Noah would chase after it. Noah didn't. He preferred the tractor, pushing it through the dirt with small but focused movements. Nothing about the moment felt dangerous. Parents didn't think twice about stepping inside for a quick task. Linda answered the phone believing she'd return to the same scene she left. A child in the yard. Sunlight warming the grass. The gentle buzz of an ordinary day. But something else moved through the woods behind the Collins home. A presence no one saw clearly. A presence that should not have been there. Later, after the case went cold, some neighbors admitted they had seen men they didn't recognize near the ridge earlier in the week. A hunter remembered a truck parked in a spot where trucks didn't usually stop. Someone else mentioned hearing footsteps in the woods after dark. Each detail small on its own. Each one ignored at the time. The truth is, towns like Pine Creek often overlook the signs of trouble because trouble feels too far away to recognize. On that afternoon, when Linda walked inside, she had no reason to turn back quickly. No reason to think her 2-minute absence carried any danger. Noah had never wandered far from the yard. He didn't know the trails through the woods. He didn't know anyone would want to take him. But someone was watching. Someone had been watching for days. When Linda returned, she didn't walk into chaos. She walked into stillness. A stillness so unnatural it froze her in place. Noah's tractor lay in the grass. The wind didn't move the trees. Even the birds seemed silent. In that moment, Linda felt the kind of fear that reaches the bones before the mind can explain it. Her voice broke the quiet as she called Noah's name. Mark ran to her side. David came around from behind the shed. Neighbors heard her from their porches and hurried over. Panic moved faster than reason, and soon the entire yard filled with people searching every corner. The woods swallowed their calls without giving anything back. When the sun dropped behind the trees, flashlights came out. Men formed lines. Dogs barked into the dark. Radios crackled as deputies coordinated the search. But the woods stayed quiet. Too quiet. Like they had swallowed Noah whole. The search continued for days. With every hour that passed, hope thinned. The town changed. Doors stayed locked. Parents held their children tighter. Mark stopped sleeping through the night. Linda stopped humming. David began spending weekends wandering the same trails he'd searched 100 times. Years passed, but the ache stayed. The Collins family never left Pine Creek. They couldn't leave the place where Noah vanished. Every sunrise reminded them of the world before. Every sunset reminded them of the world after. 51 years later, when Noah walked back into the sheriff's office alive, the town was forced to face a truth it had buried long ago. The world they trusted had cracked long before they saw it happen. To understand how deep this story cuts, you have to walk with me into the moment the world shifted under the Collins family. Pine Creek remembers the day Noah disappeared the same way people remember where they were when major tragedies struck. Every detail sticks. Every sound, every smell, every sudden silence sits like a weight that never lifts. It began with a normal afternoon, one that should have ended with supper, a bath, and a tired little boy falling asleep beside his favorite toy tractor. Instead, it became the moment every parent fears but hopes never touches their home. Linda's short trip inside the house lasted less than the amount of time it takes to lace a shoe. A quick phone call. A simple routine. The kind of interruption mothers make every day without thinking twice. When she stepped back outside, she expected to see Noah in the same patch of grass where she'd left him. She expected to see Mark running around the yard, kicking dust into the air. She expected to hear the same steady hum of quiet country life. What she found was stillness. A kind of stillness that doesn't belong anywhere near a child. The yard was calm, almost frozen. The breeze that had moved the clothes on the line seemed to fade. The hum of insects muted. Not even the usual barking from the neighbor's dog broke the silence. Linda walked forward, holding the screen door open with her hand, eyes searching for her son's small shape somewhere near the ground. "Noah," she called gently. She thought maybe he had crouched behind the old tractor tire near the shed. Maybe he had wandered toward the bushes chasing a bug. Kids his age didn't move fast or far, so worry hadn't hit yet. Not fully. Not until she reached the middle of the yard and did not see the tiny boy she had tucked into bed the night before. "Noah," she called again, louder this time. Still nothing. The panic in Linda's voice carried into David's workshop behind the house. He came around the corner wiping his hands on an oil-stained rag. Mark ran out from the side of the yard, expecting to see his brother hiding. He spotted the toy tractor on its side in the dirt. Linda's eyes locked on the same object, and the reality of what she didn't see hit her harder than any blow could. That tractor had never left Noah's hands. He carried it like a comfort. Even at night, it slept near his pillow. Seeing it abandoned in the grass sent a shock through her body. Moments later, neighbors who heard Linda's cries came running. A retired teacher. A young couple from down the road. A teen who rode his bike past the house every day. They didn't ask questions. They didn't wait for instructions. They spread through the yard calling Noah's name. When the first deputy arrived, he scanned the yard, then the woods, then the parents. He gave a short nod, clicked his radio, and called for backup. In Pine Creek, deputies were used to handling small disputes, noise complaints, and the occasional livestock problem. Missing children were rare. Missing children without traces were unheard of. Right now, you're standing with me in that yard. Can you feel that stillness? If this story is hitting you like it's hitting me, share it with someone who appreciates true mysteries. Each share helps us reach our goal of 1,000 subscribers and makes sure Noah's truth spreads far beyond Pine Creek. More deputies arrived within minutes. The sheriff himself showed up shortly after, still wearing the jacket he kept on the back of his office chair. Everyone expected the same outcome most small-town cases had: a child found wandering near a creek bed, tired but unharmed. But as the minutes stretched and the search line grew, that hope began to thin. The first hour brought urgency. The second brought fear. The third brought disbelief. Dogs swept through the woods, noses to the ground, handlers shouting commands. Flashlights cut through the trees as the sun dropped lower. Volunteers walked through brush and dirt, stepping over fallen branches and dry leaves, looking for any hint, a shoe, a shirt, a little handprint left in the soil. Nothing. The tracker dogs reached the edge of a narrow brook and stopped. Not because they scented danger. Not because they found a trail. They stopped because they found nothing. They walked in circles as if confused, then sat down. The absence of scent hit the handlers harder than finding a trail ever could. A child leaves signs. A child leaves traces. Even the smallest movement leaves something behind. But Noah had left nothing. Not a single footprint. Not a broken twig. Not even a disturbance in the leaves. It felt wrong in a way no one could explain. As night swallowed Pine Creek, search teams lit lanterns and flashlights that created glowing pockets of effort across the woods. Neighbors brewed coffee and delivered it in thermoses to volunteers. Someone brought blankets for the Collins family. Linda didn't sit. She paced the yard, holding the toy tractor against her chest, her voice hoarse from calling her son's name. Mark sat on the porch steps, knees pulled to his chest. He kept looking at the place where Noah had been standing. He didn't blink much. He didn't cry until later, and when he did, he cried quietly, the way older brothers do when they think they should have protected someone smaller. David tried to stay hopeful, but hope chipped away each hour. He walked the same stretch of woods over and over until his boots dug grooves in the earth. Deputies told him to rest. He refused. By the third day, helicopters buzzed above the treetops. Volunteers searched fields miles away. Posters went up in nearby towns. But the truth settled into Pine Creek the way cold settles into bones, slowly, painfully, permanently. Noah was gone. And something about the way he had vanished never sat right with anyone. A child doesn't disappear between one breath and the next. Not without someone seeing. Not without someone hearing something. Not without a trace. Locals whispered at church gatherings. They whispered at grocery stores. They whispered over fences. Some swore they saw men they didn't recognize near the ridge earlier in the week. Others claimed a strange truck sat near the woods on one of the nights before Noah went missing. None of those whispers had been shared soon enough to matter. The case slipped into silence. Into filing cabinets. Into old memories that hurt too much to revisit. Years turned into decades. Searches stopped. Volunteers went back to their lives. The Collins family tried to live around the hole that never filled. And then, half a century later, the boy who disappeared walked back into town as a grown man. His return didn't close the case. It opened a new one. One that suggested Pine Creek had been wrong about everything from the start. Because Noah didn't come back with simple answers. He came back with a truth that pointed to an even larger danger. A truth that began with one claim: I wasn't kidnapped. I was taken for my safety. I want to take you from that quiet yard in Pine Creek to a small cabin near Lake Murray, about an hour to the north. The search teams in 1973 never made it this far. They pushed through brush and crossed creek beds, but they did not follow the thin path worn by one man over years of walking alone. That path belonged to Caleb Boone. Long before his name appeared in any report, it lived only in one place, in the memory of a child who went to sleep near his own back door and woke up on a hard wooden floor. Noah remembers the first things his mind grabbed onto. Rough boards under his hands. A dull ache in his head. A dry throat. His fingers reached for his toy tractor out of habit and found nothing. The smell in the room was heavy with smoke, soup, and old wool. When he opened his eyes, he saw a low ceiling, crooked walls, and a small fire with a pot hanging over it. Near that fire sat a stranger. The man watched him in silence at first. His face had deep lines, his beard was uneven, and his hair was more gray than dark. His eyes were not wild. They were watchful and tired, like someone who had gone a long time without rest. This was Caleb. A man who moved from place to place, who trusted no one, who picked a quiet patch of woods near the lake and tried to disappear. I need you to pause with me at this moment and really consider, what would you do if you woke up in that cabin? If this mystery has you on the edge of your seat, smash that like button. Your engagement tells me you're ready to uncover the rest of Noah's incredible story. According to Noah, Caleb spoke gently that first night. He told the boy he had brought him there to keep him safe. He claimed there were men in the woods who wanted to take him for their own reasons. Men who had watched the Collins house from the tree line. Men who carried cases and radios. Men who, in Caleb's words, did not care about children, only about pressure and payback. A 4-year-old cannot weigh those claims. Safety, to Noah, was still the sound of his mother's voice and the sight of his brother in the yard. None of that was in reach now. All he had was the blanket Caleb wrapped around him and the light from the fire. While Pine Creek searched, Caleb paced. He moved from one small window to another, listening for engines, voices, or dogs. He had not planned to become anyone's guardian. He saw movement in the woods near the Collins home, watched a man step toward the yard, and reacted. By the time night fell, he had carried Noah deep into the trees. Turning back meant walking into deputies, neighbors, and a past he believed would condemn him on sight. Caleb had a record. Burglary. Theft. Time served. Men like that did not walk into a sheriff's office holding a missing child and expect to be heard. So he made the choice he trusted most. He stayed hidden. From the town's view, the story froze at the moment the search failed. From Noah's view, the story kept moving in a one-room space where days and nights pressed close together. Mornings started with smoke from the stove and the scrape of boots on the floor. Caleb would step outside and stand still for a long time, listening. Only after that would he send Noah to the far side of the clearing while he checked traps and brought water up from a narrow path to the lake. The rule was simple: never go near the trees, never wave at cars, never answer if you hear strangers. Some people might help you, Caleb told him more than once. Some won't. You're too young to tell the difference, so we keep to ourselves. Those words sank in deep. Over the next 17 years, they became the lens through which Noah saw every road, every stranger, every knock on a door. In 2024, when Noah sat in an interview room and spoke about Caleb, investigators listened for signs of abuse. They expected anger. They expected hate. Many of them were parents. They wanted a clear villain. That is not the story they got. Noah did not describe beatings. He described rules. He talked about long walks where Caleb showed him how to step on stone instead of soil to avoid prints, how to travel in heavy rain because it washed tracks away, how to stop and listen before every move. To the investigators, this sounded like more than protection. It sounded like someone training a child to live as a shadow. They asked if Caleb ever struck him. Noah said no. They asked if Caleb ever told him he could not leave. Noah said he never used those words. He would say, "Out there is trouble. In here, you're still breathing." They asked if Caleb ever mentioned Pine Creek by name. Here, Noah paused. He remembered one gray afternoon when the wind shook the trees around the cabin. Caleb had spent the day restless, starting chores and dropping them. As they sat near the stove, the older man stared into the coals and spoke in a tone Noah had only heard a few times. "I used to know folks like your people," he said. Good folks who thought telling the truth was enough to keep trouble away. They thought if they did the right thing, the wrong people would move on. They were wrong. At 4 or 5, Noah did not know what that meant. Years later, those words returned when he learned about his father's old testimony in Wichita Falls. Caleb wasn't talking about strangers. He was talking about David Collins and the men with grudges that reached across years and state lines. Back in the interview room, one investigator leaned closer and asked a direct question. "Do you think Caleb knew the men who were watching your house?" Noah stared at the table. When he finally spoke, his voice was steady. "He never said he knew them," Noah answered. "He said he knew their kind." That one line shifted the mood inside that room. Up to that point, many in law enforcement still thought of Caleb as a man who stumbled into danger once and never found a way out. After that, it became harder to ignore the idea that he recognized the threat not by chance, but from experience. He may not have known the exact men at the tree line, but he knew the group they moved for. That leaves a hard question. If Caleb truly believed those men would harm Noah because of something his father did, was taking him an act of protection or theft? Did he save the boy's life or steal it? When investigators finally stepped into the real cabin in 2024, they did not step into a horror setting. They walked into a place that looked like fear and caution had lived there a long time. Broken chairs, rusted hooks on the wall, a shelf with a few cans left behind. In one corner, a thin blanket lay folded on a crate, worn down by age and dust. It did not look like a place where hate ruled. It looked like a place where a damaged man tried to hide from his own past and pulled a child into the hiding place with him. What they had not found yet, under those warped floorboards, was the proof that Caleb had been watching back just as closely as the men near the Collins house had watched him. By the time investigators reached Caleb Boone's old cabin in 2024, the place looked ready to collapse under its own weight. The wood had gone soft in places. The windows were cracked. The roof sagged like someone had pulled the life out of it. Yet there was something in the air that made everyone on the team stand a little straighter. They knew this wasn't just a forgotten shack. This was the place where Noah's missing years lived. Every step they took stirred up decades of memories no one in Pine Creek ever expected to confront. Deputies pushed the door open. It creaked so loud one of them flinched. Inside, dust floated in the beam of a flashlight. An old chair lay on its side. A pot hung crooked over a stone circle that once held fire. The place felt small. Too small for a child and a full-grown man to share for years. Yet Noah had lived here through seasons, storms, sickness, and silence. Investigators moved slowly, like they were afraid the floor might break, or worse, afraid the truth might. We're nearing a turning point in this investigation that will challenge everything we thought we knew. If you haven't subscribed yet, now is the moment. We're climbing toward 1,000 subscribers, and your support helps us uncover more hidden truths like Noah's. Join us on this journey. The truth can't stay buried forever. One deputy knelt near the corner, brushing dirt aside to look for anything that might explain the life Caleb and Noah shared. Another examined the broken shelf. Someone else checked for signs of anyone stopping by the cabin after Caleb died. They expected lost tools, scraps, old clothes. They found all of that. But none of those items changed the story. The change came when a flashlight beam slid across a floorboard that didn't sit quite right. The board was loose, just enough to catch the eye of someone who had searched cabins before. The deputy tapped it with his boot. It knocked back hollow. He dropped to his knees, pulled out a knife, and wedged it into the gap. The wood lifted with a groan. Underneath, something metal caught the light. A box. About the size of a small loaf of bread. Covered in rust. Cold to the touch. The deputy called the team over. They all saw the same thing. This was not something Caleb would have left there by accident. The box was hidden. Buried deep enough to keep away from sight, but close enough for him to reach if needed. One investigator asked if they should open it there or take it in. The sheriff gave a simple answer: open it. The lid resisted at first. It took two of them and a flathead tool to pry it open. When it finally gave, the room felt heavier, as if the air thickened. Inside lay photographs. Black and white. Old. Worn by time but still sharp enough to show details that would change everything Pine Creek thought it knew. The first photo showed two men standing near a tree line. One had a hard jaw, hair slicked back, and a heavy coat that didn't fit the season. The other stood a step behind him, holding a case with both hands. Neither man looked like someone who belonged to a quiet Oklahoma town in the early 70s. They looked like the kind of men who carried orders they didn't question and left trouble behind them. The second photo was taken from a different angle. You could see the Collins property in the background. The men weren't posing. They were watching. More photographs showed the same pattern, the men near the woods. The men near a ditch. The men crouched, pointing at something on the ground. The men moving equipment no one in Pine Creek owned. Investigators didn't speak at first. They didn't need to. These weren't random visitors. These weren't men looking for a place to fish or hunt. These were men securing an area. Men preparing for something. Men who came with purpose. So the question hit hard. What were they doing near the Collins home before Noah vanished? The next layer of truth came in the form of folded pages tucked beneath the photographs. Old notebook paper, edges curled, ink fading. The handwriting belonged to Caleb. Sharp strokes. Fast lines. The kind of writing done by someone trying to record something before it vanished from memory. The first page described two strangers staying near the woods for several days. Caleb wrote about seeing them carry equipment cases and radios. He noted the times they appeared, the direction they came from, the path they used when they left. He wrote that something about them reminded him of old work. The phrase sat in the air like a bad taste. Old work. A life Caleb once lived in Kansas. A life he didn't talk about. A life that tied him to people who didn't forget grudges or mistakes. The next page described an incident the day before Noah vanished. Caleb claimed he saw the men checking the perimeter near the Collins yard. He wrote they kept scanning the back fence, waiting for the child to wander close. This made investigators stop reading. They looked up at each other, each processing the same disturbing thought: these men weren't hunting randomly. They had a direction, a purpose, a target. The most painful part came next. Caleb wrote that the men weren't interested in Noah specifically. They were interested in someone connected to him. Someone older. Someone who had once given testimony that damaged work the group had done in Wichita Falls. The words hit with gut-level impact. They think the child is the grandson of the man they want. Investigators read the line again. And again. And again. Noah wasn't the intended target. He was leverage. What made the room fall quiet was not only what Caleb saw. It was what he believed would happen if those men reached Noah first. They will take him anyway. They won't care what he knows. A child is enough to bring a man to his knees. This was the piece Pine Creek never understood. Parents had told each other stories about a stranger driving through town. They imagined someone luring a child away. They never imagined a network of grown men moving across states to pressure a witness from years before. Investigators turned to the sheriff. He stood still, looking at the pages, at the cabin, at the life Caleb tried to build in this broken space. They all saw what this meant. Caleb didn't take Noah because he wanted a child. He took Noah because he thought someone else was going to. That truth cut through the room sharper than ice. It didn't erase the years Noah lost, but it shifted the ground under everyone's feet. Back in town, Noah sat alone in a motel room. He held a cup of coffee gone cold hours ago. He didn't know the cabin search had happened yet. He didn't know the box existed. He didn't know the photograph survived 5 decades under floorboards. But he could feel something coming. A shift. A pull. The same feeling he used to get whenever Caleb paced at the windows for hours, refusing to speak. When investigators returned and placed the photographs in front of him, Noah didn't react with shock. He reacted with quiet recognition. "That's them," he said, pointing to the figures. Those are the men he talked about. You saw them? The sheriff asked. No, Noah answered. He never let me get close enough to see. But he described them. He described that case. He described that coat. Then Noah said something that made the room fall silent. He wasn't lying. He was scared of them. Every single day. This moment changed the entire feel of the case. It no longer looked like a missing boy story. It looked like a suppressed threat. A hidden feud. A mistake from the past the Collins family never knew they were paying for. But there was still one question the photographs didn't answer. Why did those men walk away empty-handed the day Noah vanished? That answer waited in the next act. And it would turn the case inside out. When the sheriff's team brought the box of photographs and notes back to Carter County, the real shift in the investigation began. Up until this point, deputies thought they were reopening an old story, something contained. Something that had ended decades ago. But once those pages hit the evidence table, once investigators started matching dates and looking at forgotten files from the early 70s, Pine Creek entered territory no one expected. This is where I need your help. The comment section below is our collective investigation board. What do you think was happening in Pine Creek? Who do you believe was telling the truth? Your theories might help us piece together what really happened to Noah. Drop your thoughts below and join our search for answers. The first clue came from a deputy barely old enough to remember the original case. He was assigned to help review old records, and he didn't expect to find much. Most small-town files from that era were thin, handwritten, and slow to reveal anything useful. But in a dusty box marked Archive, 1971 to 1974, he found a folder labeled with a name he recognized, David Collins. Noah's father. At first, it looked like basic paperwork. A few statements. Some signed reports. Nothing unusual. But the deputy noticed one document stapled to the back. It was a summary of a testimony David had given in Wichita Falls 2 years before Noah disappeared. A testimony tied to a case involving a traveling criminal group that handled debts, intimidation, and retaliation across several states. The moment that detail reached the sheriff, the entire station fell quiet. This wasn't the story anyone expected. Not even close. The file laid it out clearly. David Collins had spoken with federal agents about a man moving illegal goods across the border into Texas. Nothing violent. Nothing dramatic. But the testimony had caused trouble for someone higher up. A man who later walked free because of a technicality. A man known for remembering his enemies. The timing lined up too well. 2 years after David testified, unfamiliar men began appearing around Pine Creek. Shortly after those sightings, Noah vanished. And the photographs in Caleb's cabin showed the exact type of men tied to that network. Investigators realized something frightening. The Collins family never knew they were connected to danger. David thought he had done the right thing by speaking up. He thought the case had ended. He thought life had returned to normal. He was wrong. The sheriff called for a full review of the Wichita Falls case. Deputies dug through state archives, newspaper clippings, and microfilm. Claire Benton, the journalist from Tulsa, pushed her way into the investigation again. She had already uncovered Caleb's false identity. Now she sensed another thread waiting to be pulled. The deeper they went, the more clear it became. David Collins and Caleb Boone were tied to the same circle, but from different ends. David had witnessed something as a younger man. Caleb had lived inside that world before walking away. 2 men with no connection to each other, except through the group that would later watch the Collins home. This realization struck Noah harder than any physical blow. He sat across from deputies as they explained the files they found. His face stayed still, but his hands tightened together. Learning that his father was tied to trouble, even unknowingly, felt like losing him all over again. David had died long before Noah's return. He never had the chance to explain. Never had the chance to tell Noah the truth. Never had the chance to say he was sorry for anything he did or didn't do. One deputy placed the file gently on the table and said, "Your father had no idea this would happen." Noah nodded, but it didn't ease the ache in his chest. Meanwhile, Mark reacted much differently. Mark had lived through the disappearance. He had watched their mother break. He had watched their father age under the weight of grief. Hearing that strangers might have targeted their family because of something David once said set off a storm inside him. He confronted investigators in the hallway. "You're telling me my dad did something that got my brother taken?" he asked. His voice cracked. "That's what you're saying." The sheriff stepped toward him and lowered his voice. "Your dad told the truth in a case where most folks would have stayed quiet. He did the right thing. None of what happened is his fault." Mark didn't answer right away. He stared at the floor, jaw clenched, trying to find balance between anger and grief. The thought that the father he idolized might have carried a secret he never shared shook him deeply. But the truth was more complicated. David wasn't a man with secrets. He was a man who never knew his truth had consequences. The criminal group in Wichita Falls had a pattern. When someone interfered with their work, they didn't always come after that person directly. They went after weak points, vulnerabilities, people who mattered. A child would have been the easiest way to strike back. But why take Noah and not Mark? Why take the youngest child and not the older one? Investigators looked to Caleb's notes for answers. One line stood out: "They want the younger one. They think he knows something." Noah didn't know anything, of course. He was 4 years old. He wasn't connected to any of it. But criminals tied to that network didn't need truth. They only needed leverage. Leverage was enough to break a man. Leverage was enough to force silence. Leverage was enough to satisfy a debt. And if they believed Noah was the one they needed, then that meant someone gave them the wrong information. Someone pointed them to the wrong child. Someone gave them a name that wasn't right. This idea sent a chill through everyone in the room. It meant someone near Pine Creek might have been aware of the threat. Someone who wanted trouble directed away from themselves. Someone who may have let the Collins family take the hit. Claire picked up this thread immediately. She asked investigators for the list of people interviewed in 1973. She also asked for the list of people connected to David's testimony. It didn't take her long to find overlaps. Names repeated in both sets of papers. Old neighbors. People who had moved away long ago. One man who left town 2 days after Noah disappeared. Another family that never spoke to the Collins family again. Were these coincidences? Maybe. But cold cases rarely live on coincidence alone. While investigators debated theories, Noah tried to process the new information on his own. He walked outside for air. The Oklahoma sky stretched wide above him. A sky he hadn't stood under since he was a child. A sky that belonged to the life taken from him. He tried to remember his father's voice. His mother's laugh. Mark calling him from the yard. But those memories had faded like old photographs left in sunlight. Inside, deputies continued examining the Wichita Falls case. They found one file that explained why hints of danger reached Pine Creek in the first place. David had seen something he shouldn't have. He had spoken to the wrong people about it. It wasn't major. It wasn't dramatic. But it was enough. One statement from the old file spelled it out: retaliation likely. Target unknown. Target unknown. 3 words that meant nothing in 1971. 3 words that meant everything in 2024. The sheriff closed the file slowly. He didn't speak for a moment. Then he looked at his deputies and said, "We've been searching for the wrong motive for 51 years." The room went quiet. Someone finally asked, "So why now? Why come back now? Why wasn't this handled then?" The sheriff answered with the truth no town leader ever wants to admit, because sometimes people don't want to see the warning signs. They want peace more than they want truth. And that is how danger stayed hidden. That is how Noah disappeared. That is how a small town lived in a shadow it never acknowledged. But now, with the truth in front of them, investigators faced a new question: if the men who targeted the Collins family were acting on misinformation, then who gave them that information? And more importantly, why did they return 51 years later? That answer waited in the next act. And it was the part Pine Creek feared the most. News in Pine Creek used to move slowly. It traveled through church doors, front porches, and the diner counter. In 2024, it moved through phones. By the night after the DNA test, the headline had spread far beyond Oklahoma: "Missing boy returns after 51 years." Local stations showed it first, then state outlets, then national feeds. On screens across the country, people saw 2 images side by side. A small boy on a faded missing poster. A gray-haired man walking into the Carter County Sheriff's office. I'm curious, where are you watching this case unfold from? Drop your location in the comments. It's fascinating to see how this story resonates with people from different places, especially as we piece together what really happened to Noah. For most viewers, it was a shocking story to talk about for a few minutes, then scroll past. For Pine Creek, it was the day the past came back. The people who had lived through the search did not need reporters to remind them. They remembered the posters taped to the grocery store window. They remembered men walking shoulder to shoulder through the woods. They remembered Linda's voice changing from steady to broken over 3 long days. Those memories had lived under the surface for half a century. The moment the sheriff stepped in front of the cameras, they rose up again. He faced a tight crowd of microphones and raised phones. "Yes," he said. "The man who came forward is Noah Collins. Yes, he was 4 when he disappeared. Yes, he has been gone for 51 years. Yes, this case is open again." When reporters pushed for details, he shook his head. "We're not guessing in front of cameras," he said. "We owe the Collins family better than that." Inside, Noah watched from a hallway. He had asked for one thing before the sheriff spoke. "Please don't put my mother on TV," he said. "She doesn't know who I am. She doesn't need this." After all his years of hiding, his first move in the public world was to protect the woman whose mind had already lost him once. Out in town, reactions pulled in opposite directions. In a small house near the edge of Pine Creek, an older woman sat on her couch and cried into a dish towel. "I knew that boy wasn't gone," she whispered to herself. On another street, a man pointed at the screen and shook his head. "That drifter who took him? They should have locked him up. 51 years and the kid shows up now? That's wrong." At the diner, people circled around the same arguments that would echo for weeks. If Caleb hadn't grabbed that child, those other men might have done worse, someone said. He had no right, another answered. You don't steal a kid because you're afraid. Which side are you on? Hit that like button if you think Caleb was trying to protect Noah, or comment justice if you believe he stole a child from his family. This case divides people just like it divided Pine Creek, and reaching 1,000 subscribers will help us explore more cases where the truth isn't black and white. These weren't clean takes. They were attempts to make something terrible feel simple. Mark Collins heard it all. He was the one who still lived here, still bought groceries here, still picked up his mother's prescriptions. Now, each trip through town felt like walking past open windows in a house where everyone talked about him. Once, while standing in line at the store, he heard a stranger say, "I always thought there was something off about that family." Mark set his items down and walked out with his fists clenched by his sides. He knew if he opened his mouth in that moment, every word would come out as a shout. While Pine Creek argued, another player stepped quietly into the story. Her name was Claire Benton. Claire drove in from Tulsa in an older sedan with a notebook on the passenger seat. She worked freelance, chasing cold cases other journalists were tired of. She had already read every article she could find on Noah's disappearance. She had copies of court records tied to David Collins. What she wanted now was the part that never made it to paper. She did not start at the sheriff's office. She started at the library. She sat at a squeaky wooden chair and ran through old film of the Pine Creek Gazette from the early 70s. She watched the search for Noah move from front page to inside page to small blurbs and then vanish. No follow-up on strange vehicles. No questions about men near the woods. Nothing tying the case to the trouble in Wichita Falls. From there, she drove slow through the older streets and talked to the people who would still talk. Some opened their doors and let the word spill. Some shut them as soon as she said Noah's name. One retired mechanic agreed to meet her in his driveway. He leaned on the hood of a truck and spoke like he had been waiting years for someone to ask. "He came through right before that boy went missing," the man said. "Didn't look like anyone from around here." Asked about the road that ran behind the Collins place. Wanted to know how far he could go without hitting town traffic. "Did you tell the sheriff back then?" Claire asked. He shook his head. "No. We stayed out of other people's trouble. Figured if he was trouble, it would follow him, not us." He paused, then added quietly, "We were wrong." That admission summed up more than one man's regret. It summed up a whole town's way of thinking. Back at the sheriff's office, phones rang non-stop. People called with tips, guesses, and half-remembered stories. Deputies tried to separate useful detail from noise. While the town buzzed, Noah tried to keep his world small. He spent his mornings answering questions with investigators, his evenings sitting alone in his motel room, and whatever time he could at the assisted living center where his mother lived. One afternoon, he walked into the lobby just as a local station replayed the press conference. His own name ran across the bottom of the screen. The old missing poster floated beside a newer photo of his face. A nurse reached for the remote, but Linda heard it. She looked up, eyes narrowed like she was searching for a word she couldn't quite reach. Then, just as fast, her gaze shifted back to the window. Noah stood at the doorway and watched. He had now seen himself on two kinds of screens. One as a missing child. One as a returned man. Neither image showed what it felt like to stand there, hearing his name bounce around a town that no longer knew him. He sat down beside his mother. She smiled in a kind, distant way and patted his hand. "Do you remember that little song?" he asked. "The one you used to hum?" She frowned, then began softly humming the same short tune she had hummed over laundry, over dishes, over years of waiting by the window. That sound hit him harder than any headline. The rest of her memory might be gone, but the rhythm of those days still lived somewhere inside her. While Noah listened to that song, the sheriff's office logged a different sound. A deputy on night patrol near Noah's motel spotted a dark truck roll past the entrance. It moved slow, then kept going. A few minutes later it came back, passed again, and left. The plate was caked in mud. When he mentioned it back at the station, an older officer looked up sharply. "We had one like that in the notes from '73, he said. "Same kind of truck near the Collins place. Never did catch the plate then, either." The room went quiet for a moment. It could have been nothing. It could have been a man lost, or curious, or careless. It also could have been a reminder. The sheriff ordered extra patrol around the motel and around Linda's care home. He did not share the sighting with the press. Pine Creek already had one shock to carry. He didn't need crowds chasing a truck in the dark. Still, he felt the same thought many people in town had begun to feel but were afraid to say out loud. What if the danger that stepped into Pine Creek in 1973 had never fully left? Not long after, investigators returned to Lake Murray to comb through Caleb Boone's cabin one more time. They knew about the box and the photos. This time, they were looking for anything they might have missed the first round. Under a loose board near the far wall, they found it. A folded, yellowed page in Caleb's hand. A page that did not talk about strangers in the trees or men with cases. It talked about Pine Creek. And it hinted that someone inside the town had been part of the story all along. Investigators returned to the cabin at Lake Murray expecting nothing more than dust and silence. They already had the metal box, the photographs, the notes about the men near the Collins property. They had the timeline, the motive, the shadows that connected Pine Creek to Wichita Falls. What they didn't expect was the one thing Caleb had hidden even deeper, a page buried beneath the floorboards near the far wall. It wasn't sealed. It wasn't protected. It wasn't meant to survive half a century. Yet somehow the page held together, edges curled, ink faded but still readable. When the deputy unfolded it carefully, the sheriff leaned in. The words were different from the other notes. These weren't observations. These weren't times or descriptions. These weren't warnings about men in the woods. These words felt personal. The first line read, "They aren't here for the child. They're here because someone in Pine Creek told them where to go." No one spoke for several seconds. This one sentence cracked the case open again, not backward into the past, but forward into a truth the whole town had avoided for 51 years. Someone in Pine Creek had pointed the danger at the Collins family. Not a stranger. Not an outsider. Someone who lived among them. Someone who knew the layout of the properties. Someone who knew the kids played in the yard. Someone who knew David Collins had testified. The sheriff said quietly, this didn't come from paranoia. Caleb was writing what he saw. The next part of the note added a heavy layer. I recognized one of them. I can't prove it. I hope I'm wrong. This made the investigators exchange looks. Caleb didn't write with hesitation. His notes about the men near the woods were clear and direct. His notes about the equipment cases were factual. But this line, I hope I'm wrong, held fear, regret, and something else. Recognition. If you've been following this investigation with us, you are now part of something bigger than just another true crime story. Share this video with someone who appreciates real mysteries with actual evidence and consequences. Help us reach our goal of 1,000 subscribers who demand truth, not sensationalism. The sheriff folded the page slowly. He knew one of them. Maybe not the man by name. But he knew the type of work. The group. The way they moved. Claire Benton received a scan of the note within the hour. She stared at it for a long time in her motel room. She had already dug through old Gazette archives. She had already interviewed neighbors who remembered strangers near the ridge in '73. But this was the first suggestion that someone inside the town had helped guide the danger. She started a list. Old neighbors. People who lived close to the Collins home. Anyone connected to David's testimony. Anyone who left Pine Creek quickly after Noah vanished. Anyone who stood too quiet during the original search. Names filled her notebook, one after another. Meanwhile, back in the sheriff's office, deputies poured through the rest of Caleb's papers for hints. One note described a truck he saw several times near the Collins property during the week before Noah disappeared. The truck had a missing front plate, a dent near the passenger door, and a broken taillight covered with tape. That detail hit a nerve. A deputy pointed to a line in the 1973 search report. Someone had mentioned a truck with a taped taillight leaving the woods in a hurry. The officer who took the statement had marked it as low priority because lots of folks out here fix taillights like that. That report had sat untouched for more than 5 decades. The sheriff rubbed his forehead. So the truck we saw near the motel might not be a coincidence. Investigators now had 3 points of overlap. 1. The type of men tied to Wichita Falls appeared in Pine Creek in 1973. 2. Someone in Pine Creek may have helped them. 3. A similar truck appeared near Noah's motel in 2024. This changed the entire direction of the case. But the most unsettling detail was at the bottom of the page. A final line written in a shaky hand. The trouble isn't gone. It waits. Those 4 words lingered in the air like smoke. When investigators read that part to Noah later that day, he didn't blink. His voice stayed steady the way it always did when the past pressed too close. He used to say that, Noah told them. Especially at night. He'd put out the fire early and make sure the windows were covered. He said trouble didn't forget people like him. And people like your family, a deputy asked gently. Noah looked down at the table. He didn't say that. But he didn't have to. While investigators processed the note, Pine Creek experienced its own kind of rumbling. Conversations on porches turned sharper. People remembered details they had pushed down for years. Some swore they had seen the same dark truck decades ago. Others insisted they recognized one of the men in the photographs Caleb took, although no one could say where from. Rumors buzzed through the town faster than truth. At the diner, a man slammed his hand on the counter and said, "I told folks back then that nothing about that disappearance felt right. Told them those weren't local boys hanging around the ridge." Nobody listened. Across the room, another man shook his head. If someone from this town pointed those men at the Collins family, then who? Who would do that? People didn't want to say names aloud. But they all thought of the families that left town quickly. The workers who took jobs out of state. The neighbors who lived close to the Collins property and never spoke about the search again. These weren't accusations. These were fears looking for shape. Meanwhile, Claire followed her instincts straight to someone everyone in Pine Creek knew, someone older, someone sharp, someone who had lived near the Collins family in 1973. She knocked on his door just after sunset. He answered slowly, leaning on the frame, eyes cautious. "What do you want?" he asked. "I'm looking into Noah Collins," Claire replied. His jaw tightened. "You here to stir things up again?" "I'm here to understand what happened," she said. He wiped his mouth with the back of his hand and glanced toward the yard, as if checking whether anyone else was listening. "Some folks don't need to know everything," he said. "Maybe that's why the truth got buried," Claire replied softly. He stared at her for a long moment. Something in his expression cracked just enough to show the weight of old fear. "I remember a truck," he said quietly. "Dark. Loud. Sat near the South Road for 2 nights. The men in it didn't step inside the diner. Didn't talk to anyone. They just watched the woods." "Did you tell anyone back then?" "No," he whispered. "We were told to mind our own." "Told by who?" He shut the door before he answered. Claire stood there with the kind of frustration that sharpens curiosity instead of dulling it. Back at the sheriff's office, deputies matched the note's handwriting to other pages in the box. It was unmistakably Caleb's. There were no signs the note had been altered. Whoever he recognized near the Collins home in 1973 carried enough weight to make him write with fear. The sheriff finally said what everyone had been thinking. This wasn't random. Someone from Wichita Falls wanted leverage. Someone from Pine Creek pointed them in the right direction. And Caleb got to know her first. He looked around the room. But someone else wanted to finish this. Someone who hasn't forgotten. That statement hit everyone like cold air. Noah Collins had been home for barely a week, and already a truck was circling his motel. Already old witnesses were growing quiet. Already the ties between past and present were tightening. The hidden page didn't only reveal history. It showed that the old danger was not dead. It was watching. That night, Noah woke up suddenly in his motel room. He didn't hear a sound. He didn't see anyone outside. But a feeling, deep, familiar, unwelcome, pulled at his chest. The same feeling he had whenever Caleb froze at the window. The same feeling he carried through years of moving from town to town. He stood up, walked to the door, and looked through the peephole. Nothing. But that didn't comfort him. Sometimes the strongest warnings come from silence, not noise. By morning, the sheriff had made his decision. The investigation would shift. They weren't just looking backward anymore. They were looking at the present. At who might still have ties to the old network. At who in Pine Creek might have said just enough in 1973 to point danger at a child. And at who might still be waiting for something Noah didn't even know he carried. The cabin had given them the truth. Now the truth would push them toward the next turn in the story. The turn no one in Pine Creek was ready for. By the time the hidden page circulated through the sheriff's office, investigators knew the next step wasn't to recheck the cabin. It was to figure out who Caleb Boone really was. The man had lived in isolation for almost 2 decades with a missing child. That alone demanded answers. But now they had something heavier, proof that he recognized one of the men near the Collins property in 1973. Not a stranger. Someone tied to a world he had once belonged to. The sheriff called in every available hand to build a complete profile. They went through fingerprints, old arrest files, and prison intake forms. Most of the data came from the 1950s and early 60s. Caleb's record listed burglary, possession of stolen goods, and association with known troublemakers. But one detail stood out. The intake form had a line scratched out and rewritten. Alias previously used. The printed name was Caleb Boone. The scratched-out name underneath carried more weight. The name belonged to a family tied to the same network that later searched Pine Creek. The sheriff called in Claire Benton immediately. When Claire read it, she whispered, so he didn't just know the group. He grew up inside it. Who do you think is still watching Noah after all these years? Leave your theory in the comments. The truth in this case has layers that even seasoned investigators missed. If this deep dive investigation has you gripped, smash that subscribe button. We need just a few hundred more subscribers to reach our goal of 1,000, and your support makes these in-depth investigations possible. This changed everything. If Caleb had ties to that criminal network, then he wasn't just a bystander who stumbled onto danger. He wasn't someone who happened to walk past the tree line the day Noah wandered near the woods. He wasn't someone who reacted in the moment. He was someone who recognized the danger because he came from it. He was someone who knew the tactics. He was someone who knew the timing. He was someone who understood why men would stand alone in the trees for days. He knew because he had once lived that life. Investigators returned to Noah with the new information. They were careful with their tone. This wasn't something they wanted to drop on a man who had lost 51 years. But Noah didn't respond the way they expected. He didn't panic. He didn't cry. He didn't retreat. He simply said, "I always felt like he was hiding from more than the past." Noah explained that Caleb had been cautious in ways no ordinary drifter would be. He didn't just avoid roads, he memorized patrol times for passing rangers. He didn't just store food, he stored it in 3 separate spots, in case one was discovered. He didn't build a fire unless he could shield the glow. He didn't sleep without keeping a weapon within reach. This wasn't the behavior of a man running from a simple crime. This was the behavior of someone who had lived under threats his entire adult life. Someone who knew what it meant to be hunted. The sheriff leaned back and said, "He didn't run from the law. He ran from the people he betrayed." Before anyone could make sense of that, a deputy hurried into the room with a new printout. It was an archived record from Kansas, dated years before Caleb appeared near Lake Murray. The record linked Caleb's old name to a group that had broken apart after a series of internal disputes. One of those disputes led to a man's disappearance. Another led to a man nearly killed. A third involved money that vanished and was never recovered. Caleb had testified secretly against someone tied to that group. Just like David Collins. That realization landed like a blow to the chest. 2 men. Different states. Different years. Different lives. Both ended up on the wrong side of the same network. Both carried truths that put them at risk. Both knew what it meant to be marked. Both raised sons in quiet homes, sons whose lives would be shaped by secrets they never asked for. It was one of the deputies who finally said, maybe Caleb didn't take Noah just because danger was coming. Maybe he saw himself in that child. That thought reshaped the entire narrative. The investigation team didn't stop there. They continued following the paper trail attached to Caleb's old name. The record showed that he had been released from custody just 1 year before the trouble in Wichita Falls restarted. A probation officer's note mentioned he seemed paranoid, restless, looking over his shoulder. The officer wrote that Caleb spoke like a man waiting for a debt collector. Neighbors from that era wrote similar statements. They remembered a man who kept to himself, who didn't talk much, who changed jobs often, and who avoided anyone who asked about his past. This wasn't a man hiding a child. This was a man hiding from a network that didn't forgive. The question now wasn't whether Caleb knew the men near the Collins property. The question was why they were looking for Noah instead of Caleb. The twist came from an unexpected direction, a retired officer in Wichita Falls. He had worked cases tied to the group and remembered faces no one else did. When Claire showed him the photographs from the metal box, he leaned forward, eyes narrowing. "I remember that one," he said, pointing to the man holding the case. He handled messages. Moved from town to town. Never stayed in one place long. "Messages?" Claire asked. "Not letters," the officer said. "Warnings." When he pointed at the second man, the one in the heavy coat, his tone changed. That one was trouble. Hard eyes, Didn't talk much. Listened a lot. Claire asked the question everyone wanted answered. Did either of them work with Caleb Boone? The officer exhaled slowly. No. They worked against him. He crossed them once. They didn't forget. And there it was. The missing link. The connection that tied this story together more tightly than anyone expected. Caleb Boone wasn't just a man who happened to see danger. He was someone that danger had been chasing for years. The men in the woods weren't just following orders. They were hunting. But they weren't hunting Noah. They were hunting Caleb. They wanted him. They wanted what he knew. They wanted to settle an old score. And here came the cruelest twist of all. They misidentified the Collins child. Someone in Pine Creek had given the wrong name. Someone had pointed toward a child who looked nothing like the man who betrayed them. Someone had told the network that David Collins's younger son carried information connected to an old debt. Someone had mistaken Noah for a target he never was. The investigators sat in stunned silence. Noah leaned back in his chair and whispered, "So they weren't after me." The sheriff answered quietly, "No, they were after the man who carried you away. But someone made them believe you were part of the story." And the second twist fully settled. Caleb had not stolen Noah. He had saved him from being used as bait. He wasn't hiding the boy from the law. He was hiding him from a network that would have used him to drag Caleb out of hiding. Everything shifted again. Noah's years in the cabin were not punishment. They were the consequence of Caleb dragging a decades-old threat behind him. He wasn't stolen from his family. He was pulled into a life of survival that belonged to a man with ghosts of his own. This realization ripped open a painful truth inside Noah. "My whole life," he said softly, "I thought he kept me hidden because he did something wrong. But he kept me hidden because he did something right." The investigators didn't have an answer for that. Not one that eased the ache. But they still had one more question, the one no one wanted to voice: if those men were after Caleb, why did they return in 2024? Caleb died in 1990. He was buried in an unmarked grave near the lake. The men who hunted him should have let it go. Unless they didn't know he died. Unless they believed Noah was the last thread connecting them to the man they missed. Unless someone told them Noah returned. Unless the wrong person learned the boy was still alive. The sheriff finally said it: this wasn't only a cold case. This was unfinished business. A deputy added quietly, "And someone out there might still think Noah has what Caleb died protecting." Noah closed his eyes. Not from fear, but from the familiar weight of a warning he had heard many times as a child: one day, someone will come for you. When they do, tell them what you don't know. Noah didn't understand the warning then. He understood it now. And that understanding led directly into the next act, when the present and the past collided face to face. When the sheriff finished reviewing the files that tied Caleb to the same criminal network that once threatened David Collins, a new understanding settled over Carter County. This wasn't a story frozen in 1973. It wasn't a tragedy locked inside a cabin by Lake Murray. It wasn't just a case of a boy taken and returned. It was a loop. A loop that had never closed. And something, or someone, was still following the path Caleb left behind. The first sign came the night after investigators confirmed the second twist. A deputy patrolling near Noah's motel saw a dark truck sitting at the far end of the parking lot. Same dent on the passenger door. Same taped taillight described in old reports. Same slow pull away as if the driver wanted to be seen without getting close. The deputy drove toward it. The truck rolled forward. Not fast. Not reckless. just steady enough to keep distance. By the time the cruiser turned onto the main road, the truck had melted into the dark. It didn't speed. It didn't swerve. It simply left. The deputy filed the report quietly. The sheriff read it twice and called for extra patrol. But he didn't tell the public. Pine Creek had already been stretched thin by the return of a man they once mourned. He wasn't going to add another layer of fear unless he had proof of a real threat. Still, everyone in that building knew the truth. That truck didn't appear by accident. Not near Noah. Not after 51 years. Not days after a hidden page suggested danger never fully left. The next day, Noah stepped out of his motel room for air. He hadn't been sleeping. His body carried old habits from the cabin, the ones Caleb taught him without ever naming them. Listen before you move. Watch the street. Keep track of anyone who passes twice. Those instincts returned fast. The mystery of the dark truck keeps growing deeper. Every like on this video helps us stay one step ahead in this investigation. Every share helps us reach people who understand what's at stake when the past refuses to let go. We're building a community of truth seekers who won't let this story fade away again. Noah stood on the balcony and scanned the parking lot. The air was cold, sharp in his lungs. Morning traffic hummed along the highway, but the motel lot stayed empty except for 2 parked cars and a delivery truck. Nothing looked suspicious. But quiet can deceive. He walked down the steps slowly. Every step carried the same pattern he had learned in the woods: touch the edge, make the weight soft, keep your eyes moving. At the bottom, he stood still for a long moment. Long enough for a sudden memory to flash, Caleb whispering, "Trouble doesn't knock. It circles." A car door slammed across the street. Noah's breath caught before he realized it was just a teenager heading into a convenience store. Even so, the moment reminded him of something the investigators hadn't yet understood. He hadn't wandered through life for 51 years. He had survived it. Back inside the sheriff's office, investigators worked through the night following any lead that might explain who drove the truck. They checked nearby cameras, but the footage was too grainy. One camera caught a shape pulling onto the road but couldn't read the plate through the mud. Claire arrived early that morning with new notes of her own. She had spoken to more people in town, quiet voices, hesitant ones. Some remembered that taped taillight from years before. Some had seen similar trucks on old backroads long after the case went cold. None had reported it. In small towns, people mind their own business until it becomes everyone's problem. Claire placed her notebook on the sheriff's desk. "There's a pattern," she said. "Someone in this county has been driving a truck with that same taped light for decades. It's not the same vehicle, but it's the same mark." The sheriff raised an eyebrow. "You think it's the same man?" "I think it's someone who wants to be recognized without being known," Claire said. "He wants people to remember him, not identify him." That possibility ran through the room like cold water. Someone using the same type of truck as a signature. Someone who kept the past alive by choice. Someone who might still carry the same ties to the network Caleb feared. A deputy asked the question everyone avoided: what if he came for Caleb all those years ago, and now he's coming to see if Noah has anything worth taking? No one answered at first. Then the sheriff said if he wanted to hurt Noah, he would have done it when the boy first came home. He didn't. He watched. He watched, Claire repeated, voice low. Which means he's waiting for something. For what? That question hung over the entire investigation. Later that afternoon, Noah returned to the sheriff's office for another round of questioning. His shoulders were tense. His eyes tired. He sat across from the investigators, and the room filled with a quiet understanding that this man had carried a lifetime of fear that wasn't his fault. They showed him the report about the truck. His jaw tightened. "He followed me in Texas too," Noah said. "Twice. Months apart." "When?" the sheriff asked. "Once outside Amarillo," Noah said. "Once near Lawton. Same shape. Same way of waiting. Never close. Always enough for me to notice." "Why didn't you report it?" a deputy asked gently. "I lived with hiding," Noah said. "I didn't think anyone would believe me." The room stayed still after that. No one pressed further. They didn't need to. Noah finally looked up. "I don't know who he is. I don't know what he wants. But he knew my name before I walked into this town." That line tightened every chest in the room. Someone had kept track of Noah across states, Texas, Oklahoma, and now Pine Creek. Someone knew when he reappeared. Someone traced him to a motel 5 miles from the home he last stood in as a 4-year-old child. This wasn't coincidence. This was intent. While the sheriff and his deputies formed a protection plan, Claire drove to a part of town most people didn't visit anymore. Old houses leaned like tired men. Paint peeled from porches. Driveways cracked. These were the places where long memories lived in quiet corners. She parked at a house belonging to the family who left Pine Creek 2 days after the original disappearance. Their son, now in his late 60s, had returned recently to settle the property. He opened the door a crack when she knocked. "I told the sheriff everything I know," he said. Claire didn't move. "I'm here because someone in Pine Creek might have pointed those men toward the Collins family." His face changed, just slightly. "I didn't say a word to them," he whispered. "But you knew them," Claire said softly. Silence hung between them. He finally stepped out onto the porch and closed the door behind him. "I recognized one of the men in the photos," he admitted. "Not from around here. From Kansas. My father used to do jobs with folks like that." "Why didn't you speak up in 1973? Claire asked. He looked at the sky, eyes wet. "Because people like that come back," he said. "I thought if I stayed quiet, we'd be safe." "You weren't," Claire replied. He shook his head. "No one was." His voice broke. Claire wrote down every detail he could remember about those men. One stood out, the man with the heavy coat. He didn't smile, the man said. Didn't blink much. Didn't speak. Just watched. Claire asked the question slowly, "Is he the same one who came back?" "I don't know," he whispered. "But I think someone like him doesn't stop until he gets what he came for." Back in town, nighttime settled over Pine Creek like a thin blanket stretched too tight. Streetlights flickered. Doors locked earlier than usual. People kept checking windows even when they didn't know why. At the sheriff's office, deputies compared the old photos to the grainy dashcam image from the night before. The angle was bad. The light was wrong. The silhouette leaned forward, face hidden in shadow. But the shape of the shoulders, the tilt of the head, the way the driver held the wheel, it all felt familiar. Too familiar. "Looks like him," a deputy whispered. "Or someone trained by him," the sheriff said quietly. Neither answer brought comfort. The sheriff walked to the window and looked toward the dark road that led out of town. He had lived here decades. He knew these streets. He knew the families. He knew Pine Creek wasn't built to carry a weight like this. "We're dealing with someone who waited 51 years to finish whatever he started," the sheriff finally said. "And he isn't done," Claire added. In the middle of that quiet, someone knocked on the door frame. It was Noah. He stood there, hands in his pockets, eyes steady. "I want to know the truth," he said. "Whatever it is. I'm tired of running from a past I didn't choose." No one argued with him. They knew this story had reached its turning point. The danger wasn't hidden anymore. The driver wasn't waiting anymore. The truth wasn't in the shadows anymore. Everything was moving toward one final moment. The final reckoning waited just ahead. Once they stepped into it, there would be no going back. The last chapter of this story doesn't take place in a courtroom or an interrogation room. It doesn't end with handcuffs, a confession, or a broken door. It settles in a quiet place at the edge of town, where the truth arrives not with noise, but with the steady hum of an engine in the dark. The night after the sheriff confirmed the old networks linked to Pine Creek, Noah Collins stood outside the assisted living center where his mother lived. The sky was low and gray, holding back the last light of evening. He had spent an hour sitting by Linda's side, listening to her hum the old tune she never forgot. It was the closest thing to a reunion life could offer him now. He stepped outside slowly, pulling his jacket tight. A cold wind swept across the parking lot. Streetlights flickered. Cars passed on the road from time to time, each one sounding the same from a distance. Noah walked across the pavement, breathing in air that belonged to the home he lost and the home he was trying to reclaim. Then he heard it. A familiar engine. Slow. Measured. Too steady to be random. He turned toward the far end of the lot. A dark truck rolled in, headlights dimmed. It didn't rush toward him. It didn't swerve. It moved with a kind of purpose that didn't need speed. The same dent. The same taped taillight. The same presence that had followed him across Oklahoma and Texas. The same signature from the shadows of 1973. Noah didn't run. He didn't step back. He stood still, the way Caleb taught him, feet grounded, body calm, mind alert. The truck eased to a stop near the last light pole. The engine idled. The cab stayed dark. The driver did not step out. He didn't gesture. He didn't call out. He just sat there, watching the man he had been tracing for months. Maybe years. Noah felt that old weight in his chest, not fear, not shock, but recognition. He didn't know the man in the truck. But he knew the intention. He had lived with it in every step of his childhood. Caleb had whispered it for years, some trouble doesn't die. It waits for you to grow into its reach. The sheriff arrived minutes later with 2 deputies. Their lights washed across the pavement as they pulled in fast. But the truck backed away the moment they entered. It didn't peel out. It didn't panic. It simply reversed, turned onto the side road, and disappeared into the stretch of highway beyond town. By the time the sheriff reached Noah, the taillights were gone. "You all right?" the sheriff asked. "Yes," Noah said quietly. "He wanted me to see him." The sheriff nodded, jaw tight. Noah wasn't a child anymore. This wasn't a frightened boy who needed comforting. This was a grown man who had been carrying someone else's danger his entire life. The sheriff ordered a search of the nearby roads. Deputies combed through side streets, dirt paths, and quiet country lanes. They found tire impressions, but nothing else. The truck moved like someone who had memorized every back route in Carter County long before GPS ever existed. The next morning, the sheriff sat with Noah in his office. The light coming through the blinds cast thin lines across the floor. The world outside moved with its usual rhythm. Cars passed. Phones rang. But the room felt separate from all of that, heavier, quieter. Noah, the sheriff said carefully, we can assign protection. Keep someone near you. Make sure you're safe. Noah shook his head. He had 51 years to take something from me, he said. He didn't. He watched. That's all he ever did. The sheriff leaned back. That's not comfort. I know, Noah said. But it's the truth. He wasn't dismissing the threat. He had simply lived with it since childhood. Fear was not new to him. Silence was not new. Being watched without understanding why was not new. He had learned how to stand inside that pressure without breaking. Later that afternoon, Mark met with Noah at the old Collins property. The yard had changed with time. The shed leaned. The fence sagged. But the tree still stood tall, and the patch of woods behind the house looked almost untouched. Mark walked beside his brother slowly, hands in his pockets. I'm sorry, Mark said after a long silence. You don't have to be, Noah replied. Yes, I do, Mark said. I was angry at Dad. Angry at you. Angry at all the years that got taken from us. But none of this was your fault. Noah nodded. It wasn't Dad's either. They stood beneath the tall pine tree, the same one Noah touched hours before he vanished. This place didn't give me back, Noah said quietly. Time did. I'm trying to figure out what to do with that. Mark placed a hand on his shoulder. Start by staying. Start by letting yourself be here. The moment hung between them, a small piece of peace after decades of fracture. We've been on this journey together, piecing through the shadows of a case that spans more than half a century. If you've made it this far, you're not just a viewer, you're part of Noah's story. Hit subscribe now to help us reach our goal of 1,000 subscribers. Your support means we can continue to bring these forgotten stories into the light where they belong. The sheriff arrived later in the evening with updates. Deputies found the truck near a county road 30 miles away. Parked. Empty. Engine cold. The driver was gone. But this time, he left something behind, a folded page tucked under the wiper. No threats. No words. Just a blank sheet. To the sheriff, it was nothing. To Noah, it was a message. Caleb had said it many times, some trouble doesn't speak. It waits for you to decide what you fear. The blank page wasn't a warning. It was a reminder. A way of saying, I saw you. You saw me. The past is not finished. But the sheriff didn't let that meaning leave the room. Noah, he said, you don't have to live in that shadow anymore. Noah looked out toward the road where the truck had vanished. I don't, he said. Because I'm done running. The sheriff wasn't sure if that meant courage or resignation. But he saw the same steadiness in Noah's face that Caleb must have seen all those years ago, the steadiness of someone shaped by silence, caution, and survival. That night, Noah returned to his motel room. He sat on the edge of the bed, staring at the blank page the sheriff had handed him. He didn't feel fear. He felt something heavier, understanding. The man who followed him wasn't chasing a secret. He wasn't chasing revenge. He wasn't chasing an old debt. He was chasing the ghost of a man who had died 30 years earlier. Caleb. And Noah had become the last trace of that unfinished story. Noah folded the page carefully and set it on the nightstand. Then he whispered something Caleb once told him, a line that never left him, face the light. Don't bow to the shadow. It was the closest thing left to a final message. When dawn broke over Pine Creek, the world looked calm again. Kids went to school. Cars passed the sheriff's office. Life moved forward in small, steady steps. But the sheriff installed 2 patrol units near the motel anyway. Claire wrote her story but held back the final paragraphs. Mark checked on his brother twice before noon. And Noah stood outside, breathing in the cold morning air, knowing one truth: the past didn't own him anymore. The fear didn't own him. The silence didn't own him. He stood there, steady, quiet, grounded, a man who walked back into the world after 51 years and refused to disappear again. And Pine Creek, for the first time in decades, knew the difference between closure and truth.